Station 11 is an American limited series created by Patrick Somerville, known for Maniac, based on the 2014 novel of the same name by Canadian author Emily St. John Mandel. It premiered on HBO Max on December 16, 2021, and the show stars Mackenzie Davis, Himesh Patel, and Lori Petty. The costumes are designed by theatrical costume designer Helen Huang. Warning, there are spoilers for all 10 episodes of Station 11. One of my favorite genres are post-apocalyptic dystopias, so I was very excited to see what Station 11 was all about. It feels very timely because of the ongoing pandemic, but Station 11 is unlike anything I've seen before. At times, it was horrifying and tense and kept me on the edge of my seat, while at other times it was beautiful and quiet and poetic. It wasn't until I began writing this review that I saw that the tagline for the series was, "Survival is insufficient," and I think that this captures the essence of the series beautifully. While I enjoyed the series as a whole, the moments when I was most invested were the scenes with young Kirsten, played by Matilda Lawler, and Jeevan, played by Himesh Patel. So many of those scenes gutted me, but aside from the acting and the beautiful writing and the music was the costumes. There's quite a lot to unpack here because we were dealing with two timelines through a series of flashbacks that culminate into the season finale that brought all of the loose ends beautifully together. Added to this, we have the two plays within a story, starting with King Lear in the past and then Hamlet in the present day. I was fascinated to discover that series costume designer Helen Huang is a theatrical costume designer and comes from the theater world and has very little TV or film experience. I saw that in her CV she has worked on some Shakespearean productions and even a production of Rosencrantz and Guildenstern Are Dead, but perhaps this is why I appreciated her work so much. The design is refreshing and that there is color depicted in the costumes. Huang said she was very insistent on using a lot of color, saying in an interview with Comic Gear's podcast, "We should make a future where there is a little memory box of our past because history just doesn't disappear." A lot of the clothing in both the flashback and current timelines are purchased off-the-rack items and vintage finds. I won't get into naming them all. A quick Google search will identify them if you are looking. But some screen-accurate costumes are not purchased. Huang said that they took pieces from the 2000s and meticulously remade them, such as the blouse worn by Alex. They also made a replica of Kirsten's vintage Speedo and printed Speedo right on the bathing suit because of their need for multiples. There is this juxtaposing the professional costumes of Arthur's King Lear versus the Traveling Symphony's production of Hamlet. Huang said in an interview with comicbook.com, "With the future costumes, one of the biggest things that I did think about was I want to separate the audience from the European tradition of theater costume, especially in referencing Shakespeare." Now, there's a term used in theater when you have limited resources, when you beg, borrow, and steal to get what you need, and there is a lot of this on display, and many of the costumes in the Traveling Symphony appear to be cobbled together by found objects. As someone who started in summer stock and later in independent theater, you have to be resourceful. One of the characters even explains at one point that they don't have access to a sewing machine. I guess you can't drag one of those old Singer trundle machines on a caravan, so the theater troupe pieced together their costumes in whatever way they can, by hand sewing, glue, duct tape, stapler, wire, or whatever they have on hand. For instance, Kirsten's cape is made from gloves from Pinktree, and her corset is made from zippers. Huang said, "They are people who have been through a traumatic experience, have found the Traveling Symphony as their family as a way of an outlet, but they don't necessarily have an attachment to the way theater is supposed to look. The other thing is, they might not have the capabilities to make things exactly perfect on the scene and cut patterns that could fit the body because they don't have the skills to do that." Now, the characters themselves are also dressed in found clothing since the world has come to a technological dead end. With the majority of people dead, they would have access to a surplus of new and used clothing. As someone who has grown up during the sickness, Kirsten vaguely remembers before, while some of the younger characters only know this reality. Huang said that in the present timeline, their clothing is more defined by their resources and they are dressing more for practicality. She adds that in the future, it's a little more gender fluid. She said that as an egalitarian group, the members of the traveling symphony share their clothing, an idea that was presented by Mackenzie Davis, who plays the adult Kirsten. In a flashback scene, having come directly from the production, young Kirsten is wearing her King Lear theater costume while being barricaded in Frank's apartment. We see her wearing it again in a scene with the traveling symphony co-founder Gil. In the present day, it looked as though Alex is wearing a top made out of the same dress. Huang said that because Alex was born after the pandemic, she finds frilly, sparkly cheap things and attaches them to her clothes. Tyler's mother, Elizabeth, who believes that Tyler is dead, and his uncle Clark have lived at the Severn Airport for 20 years and renamed it the Museum of Civilization. Both Clark and Elizabeth develop a signature, almost Viking style of dress. My first instinct when I saw Clark's outfit is that his blanket cape came from the airport gift shop, where they often sell overpriced local products. In the flashbacks, Elizabeth dresses in winter white. For some reason, this is always a sign of wealth in contemporary fashion, I suppose because it's impractical. It always reminds me of Sharon Stone's outfit in Basic Instinct. I always imagine myself one day sitting by the ocean wearing that outfit. Huang said that she wanted to approach dress in the real timeline more as a representation of our economic status and what kind of perceived person we are. So Elizabeth, for instance, has a $7,000 Chanel handbag. Huang adds that the young Kirsten is dressing to her economic status because she said as a child you are dressing to the economic status of your parents. She said that young Kirsten's King Lear dress was made for her, and they chose a specific LL Bean parka and got her backpack with her name on it. Meanwhile, young Tyler, while well-dressed and cared for because his parents are both successful actors, has no real emotional connection to his mother and his late father. In Frank's condo, I appreciate all of the layering up of clothing we see on Frank and young Kirsten after they lose power because without heat, night temperatures in Chicago can drop pretty low. Kirsten fashions a thick sweatshirt into a hat. I've been in a home without heat for days in the dead of winter, so I can only imagine what that would be like for weeks on end. There is also a lot of creativity when young Kirsten creates the costumes for her Station 11 play. Both Jeevan and Frank wear handmade costumes with astronaut helmets made from strips of cardboard, and Kirsten's is covered with toilet paper tubes. My sister pointed out to me that Frank's visor is made from the clear lid of a takeout container. For the traveling symphony theater costumes, Huang and her team took inspiration from American photographer Phyllis Colombo, Charles Forget, and Japanese fashion label Comme des Garçons. Huang said, "Because of the pandemic, we were shooting up in Canada and everything was closed. The only places we had access to was vintage stores that had barrels and barrels of vintage clothing, so we did have to source from that to make these costumes." Huang's favorite costume are the post-pandemic theater costumes because she said they were the most creative and fun. In Hamlet, the nobility is depicted just by having their costumes be bigger and taking up space. She said, all the headdresses are actually from dumpster dives. Claudius's crown is made out of wires. Gertrude's crown is made out of cardboard and thimbles and different found objects that have been painted to look like decorative art. So it was a lot that went into those costumes. Obviously, there was a lot of trial and error around everything. But at the end, I think what we got was something that had a very found and almost foreign but familiar quality because a lot of the things used in it were things that exist in this world. And she added that adult Tyler's Hamlet costume was made from 5 puffer jackets. They also defined the factions based upon the production design and the space that they were in. Huang said that she started from what access these individual groups have and what they can do with it. The Traveling Symphony has a bright color palette and uses a lot of vintage clothing compared to the residents of the Museum of Civilization, formerly the Severn City Airport, which is cut off to the rest of the world and has a muted palette and a contemporary design. Huang likens the clothing design of the museum to a Gap ad. Huang said that the Dr. 11 astronaut costume was a specialty costume that was a little more challenging to design. The brief that she was given was that they wanted him to look like an astronaut space janitor. The other fun costumes are worn by those of the children of the prophet who have come to follow the teachings of Station 11, the graphic novel. These children are a sort of band of Lord of the Flies type characters, many taking to digging up landmines and using them in acts of terrorism. The children have outfitted themselves with outfits inspired by the protagonist in Station 11, as told of them by Tyler, their prophet. And it wasn't until I was making this video that I noticed that older Jeevan's vintage Southwest work shirt that he wears for the show finale was similar to his late brother Frank's shirt that he wears under his costume when he's killed in the condo by the intruder. So I don't think that was a coincidence. And before I conclude, I do have one quibble. In the present day, adult Kirsten is in the woods in shorts and bare legs. I also noticed this as well in the Showtime series Yellow Jackets. The Great Lakes, they're surrounded by mosquitoes, black flies, and ticks, so unless she is covered in DEET, her legs would have been covered in bites. But aside from that, I enjoy the show and the costumes, and I'm planning on picking up a copy of the book. If you had a favorite costume or costumes, please let me know in the comments section below. And if you're enjoying this content, consider subscribing to my channel. As always, thank you for spending time with me. I'll see you in the next video.